What if the next headline you see isn't about missiles anymore, but about soldiers crossing a border? Right now, thousands of troops are moving, warnings are getting louder, and nobody can say for certain where this ends. Before we go any further, hit that like button right now, because this story is moving fast and you don't want to miss the moment it changes. Subscribe if you want to stay ahead of this conflict instead of hearing about it 2 days late, and if you know someone who still thinks this war is winding down, send them this video, because it might be the thing that changes their mind. Let's set the stage properly, because a lot of people jumped into this story late and missed how we got here. Earlier this year, a full-blown war broke out between the United States, Israel, and Iran. Airstrikes hit Iranian territory hard. Iran responded by firing missiles and drones, not just at American forces directly, but at every country in the region that hosts American bases. Kuwait, Buehring, Qatar, the UAE, all of them got pulled into a fight they never wanted to be part of. Kuwait specifically has been hit again and again. Iranian strikes have targeted Ali al-Salem Air Base, Camp Arifjan, and Camp Buehring, three of the biggest American military footholds in the entire Gulf. These aren't small symbolic hits either. Reports describe damage to radar systems, fuel depots, and even Patriot air defense batteries. Kuwait's civilian airspace was shut down entirely in the early days of the war because the threat of incoming projectiles was simply too high. And here's the part that changes everything. This war has already cost real lives. A drone strike near a makeshift operations center close to the port of Shuaiba in Kuwait killed American soldiers and wounded dozens more. Kuwaiti service members have died too. This isn't a hypothetical conflict happening somewhere far away on a map. It's a war with a body count, playing out in a country that has hosted American troops peacefully for decades. So when Iranian officials started talking, openly, on state television, about actually invading Kuwait to seize those bases, people paid attention. Not because it sounded believable on its face, but because of who was saying it. A well-known Iranian analyst with close ties to state media named specific targets, the exact same bases that have already been hit by missiles and drones. Around the same time, a former Iranian foreign minister, now a sitting member of parliament, said Iran still has the ability to fight a real ground war against American forces in the region. He even floated the idea of capturing around 100 American troops and bringing them back into Iran as prisoners. Let that sink in for a second. This isn't an anonymous account on social media exaggerating for clicks. This is a former foreign minister and a state-aligned analyst saying this out loud, on camera, in a country where nothing gets broadcast on state television by accident. But before your mind jumps straight to tanks rolling across a border, we need to slow down and separate two things that keep getting mixed together, what people are saying and what has actually been confirmed. Because right now, there is no verified report of Iranian ground troops massing for an invasion of Kuwait. No satellite images of convoys heading toward the coast. No independent confirmation of a mobilization order. What exists is rhetoric, loud, specific, and repeated, but rhetoric all the same. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this story, because words on television and boots on the ground are two very different levels of danger, and confusing them is exactly how panic spreads faster than facts. So let's actually test this idea. Could Iran realistically pull off a ground invasion of Kuwait? Geography alone makes this incredibly hard. Iran doesn't even share a land border with Kuwait. Any ground assault would have to move through Iraqi territory or attempt a landing across the northern Gulf by sea. Both routes are heavily watched. Kuwait has invested enormous amounts of money in air defense, including Patriot missile batteries that have already proven they can intercept incoming Iranian projectiles during this war. Add satellite surveillance, coastal radar, and multiple coalition naval forces stationed just offshore, and you start to see the size of the gap between what Iranian officials are threatening and what Iran can actually execute. Now compare that rhetoric to what Iran has actually managed to do on the ground so far. In May, Kuwaiti security forces intercepted a small infiltration team linked to Iran's Revolutionary Guard trying to sneak onto Buehring Island, a sensitive area near the Iraqi border. A firefight broke out, a Kuwaiti soldier was wounded, and 4 operatives were captured. That's the real, demonstrated scale of Iranian ground activity against Kuwait right now. A small, contested skirmish involving a handful of fighters, not a coordinated force capable of storming and holding 3 major American installations. This lines up with something military analysts have said again and again throughout this war. Iran's entire strategy has never been built around large conventional ground offensives. It's built around drones, missiles, proxy fighters, and quiet infiltration. Cheap tools that are hard to trace and don't require exposing large conventional forces to a fight they'd likely lose. Analysts studying Iran's military doctrine argue that a full-scale invasion of Kuwait doesn't fit that pattern at all. What fits far better is something smaller, a raid on a border post, a covert team slipping through under cover of night, an attack designed to make headlines rather than hold territory. There's also a psychological side to all of this that's worth thinking about honestly. Talk is cheap. announcing on state television that you're capable of seizing American bases and taking 100 prisoners costs Iran absolutely nothing in terms of resources. But it forces the United States, Kuwait, and every Gulf ally to take the threat seriously, to divert attention, to strengthen defenses, to spend time and energy preparing for something that may never happen. When a country's missile stockpile has been worn down by months of strikes, when its navy has taken serious losses in the Strait of Hormuz, and when a blockade is draining hundreds of millions of dollars a day from its oil revenue, loud words become one of the few weapons still fully available. That doesn't mean the threat is fake. It means the threat might be doing more work as a warning than as an actual battle plan. At the very same time this rhetoric about Kuwait was spreading, something else was happening on a completely different border, and this part of the story has real evidence behind it. According to Kurdish opposition sources with direct contact inside the region, Iran's Revolutionary Guard has moved thousands of troops and heavy equipment toward its own border with Iraqi Kurdistan. Reports describe roughly 3,000 fighters from an elite special forces unit, plus additional Revolutionary Guard soldiers from the ground and air branches. And unlike the Kuwait claims, this movement wasn't announced in one dramatic statement. It happened gradually over several weeks, which suggests careful planning rather than a rushed emotional reaction. Now, before we go further, let's pause here for a moment. If this story is helping you actually understand what's real and what's still just talk, tap that thumbs up right now. It helps this video reach more people who are tired of panic headlines and actually want to know what's confirmed. And if this is your first time watching one of these breakdowns, subscribing means you won't miss the moment any of this crosses from rumor into confirmed fact. So why would Iran quietly reinforce its own western border instead of preparing to invade someone else's country? The answer connects to something that's been building for a while now. Earlier this year, several major Iranian Kurdish political parties formed an armed coalition with one clear goal: ending the current regime in Tehran. This coalition has grown more organized and, according to multiple reports, has received support and coordination from outside the country, including intelligence cooperation and direct engagement involving the United States. For a regime already fighting a war on multiple fronts, an emboldened, externally backed Kurdish force sitting right on its own border isn't a distant threat. It's a direct danger to its survival. So this troop movement isn't really a story about Iran preparing to attack a neighbor. It's a story about Iran trying to protect its most exposed internal weakness, while everything else around it is falling apart. Picture a boxer taking hits from every direction, still throwing punches outward to look strong, while quietly bracing to protect the one spot they know is most likely to be exploited. That's a far more accurate picture of what's happening here than the phrase invasion imminent. Now let's bring the American side into this, because none of Iran's statements are happening in a vacuum. According to reporting based on multiple American officials, the Pentagon has been actively developing plans for ground operations inside Iranian territory. Not a full-scale invasion or occupation, but potentially weeks of operations involving thousands of troops, targeting specific locations, including infrastructure tied to Iran's oil exports. Additional Marine units and elements of an elite Army airborne division have reportedly been positioned in case this plan moves forward. Suddenly, Iran's loud talk about invading Kuwait looks a little different, doesn't it? It starts to look less like an independent decision to attack, and more like a warning aimed directly at Washington, a way of saying that if American troops ever set foot on Iranian soil, the response won't stay contained to Iran alone. It becomes less about starting a new war on Kuwaiti territory, and more about deterring a war that Iran fears is already being planned against it. This is exactly how escalation tends to work in real conflicts. It rarely looks like one country deciding out of nowhere to invade another. It looks like layers of pressure stacking on top of each other, each side responding to what it believes the other side might do next, until the line between defensive posturing and offensive action starts to blur, sometimes even for the people making these decisions themselves. There's important history here too, because Iran has moved troops toward tense borders before, without it turning into war. Back in 2022, Iran built up forces near its border with Afghanistan during a dispute with the Taliban over water rights. Iranian officials publicly described their posture as restrained, even while independent reporting confirmed troops really were repositioning. That standoff eventually cooled down through direct diplomatic talks, not through combat. The situation today is far more serious, the stakes are higher, and the pressure on Iran is far greater than a disagreement over a river. But it shows a pattern worth remembering. Iran has a track record of reinforcing its borders defensively while still working diplomatic channels in the background, right up until the moment that pressure becomes truly unbearable. Let's also talk honestly about why Kuwait specifically keeps getting mentioned in Iranian threats, because it's not random. Kuwait hosts one of the most significant and long-standing American military footprints anywhere in the Gulf. Camp Arifjan functions as a major logistics hub, supporting not just American forces, but troops from partner nations as well. This relationship goes back decades, built up steadily since the aftermath of the Gulf War. Hitting or threatening these bases doesn't just put American personnel at risk. It threatens the credibility of the entire regional basing network that took the United States decades to build. Infrastructure that can't simply be rebuilt somewhere else overnight if a host country ever decided the risk wasn't worth it anymore. And this is precisely why the deaths that have already happened in Kuwait matter so much to this story. Real American soldiers have already been killed near these exact bases during earlier strikes in this war. That's not a symbolic close call. That's the reason nobody, not military commanders, not diplomats, not serious analysts, is willing to completely dismiss these new threats as empty noise, even while remaining skeptical that a full ground invasion is realistic. A regime that has already struck these targets once has already shown intent and capability at a certain level. The question now is simply how far that capability actually extends beyond drones and missiles. At the same time, it's worth remembering that Kuwait isn't facing this pressure completely alone. Other Gulf nations, including Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, have carried out their own strikes against Iran and Iranian-backed forces during this war, a major shift from the cautious, hedge-your-bets approach these countries maintained toward Tehran for years before the fighting began. Every time Iran escalates its rhetoric toward Kuwait specifically, it pushes these Gulf states closer together into a more unified, more openly allied position. That's a strategic problem for Iran, because a ground operation against Kuwait would no longer mean facing Kuwait and the United States in isolation. It would mean facing a much wider coalition of Gulf nations that have already shown a willingness to fight back directly, a coalition growing stronger the more Iran talks about escalating further. So where does all of this actually leave us? Two very different border stories are happening at exactly the same time, and they're pulling in almost opposite directions. On one side, there's a defensive troop buildup along Iran's own western border, backed by weeks of consistent, multi-sourced reporting, aimed at containing an internal uprising that genuinely threatens the regime's survival. On the other side, there's loud, specific, repeated rhetoric about invading Kuwait, coming from credible political voices on state media, but without a single independent confirmation of actual troop movement toward that border. If this breakdown is helping you separate real signals from political noise, this is exactly the moment to hit subscribe, because the next real development in this story could come from either direction, and it might happen with very little warning. None of this means the danger here is exaggerated. Wars have a long, well-documented history of spiraling out of anyone's original intentions. Escalating words build pressure on their own. Defensive troop movements can be misread as offensive ones. A single unplanned skirmish, a border incident, a miscommunication between nervous forces on either side can drag every party involved into a much larger confrontation that nobody actually planned for at the start. That risk is real, and it's exactly why every statement coming out of Tehran right now deserves careful attention rather than either blind panic or complete dismissal. What matters most right now isn't reacting to every dramatic quote as if troops are already crossing a border somewhere. What matters is watching the gap between words and verified action. On the Kuwait threats, that gap remains wide open. Loud statements, but no confirmed movement. On the Kurdish border buildup, that gap is much narrower, consistent reporting from multiple sources describing real, gradual troop repositioning over weeks. Understanding that difference isn't just an academic exercise, it's the actual skill that separates someone who understands this war from someone who simply reacts to whatever headline sounds the scariest on a given day. Here's the honest truth sitting underneath everything we've covered today. Iran is a regime being pulled in multiple directions at once, threatening a Gulf nation on one front, quietly reinforcing its most vulnerable internal border on another, and warning that it would rather destroy its own territory than allow American troops to hold it, all within the same tight window of time. That is not the behavior of a confident military machine executing a coordinated plan. That's the behavior of a government trying to look powerful in every direction simultaneously, because it can no longer afford to look weak in even one of them, even as its actual ability to back up all of those threats at once continues to shrink week by week. So here's the real question worth sitting with. When a country talks louder, the weaker its position becomes. How do you tell the difference between a genuine warning and a desperate bluff before it's too late to matter? History tells us regimes under this much pressure have made irrational, costly decisions before, simply because survival stopped being a calculation and started being an instinct. And history also tells us that most loud threats, even the ones broadcast on national television, quietly fade away without ever becoming action. The truth is, nobody watching this video, and probably nobody inside Tehran or Washington either, knows for certain which version of this story we're living through right now. What we do know is this: A regime that has already killed American soldiers on the exact bases it's now threatening to seize, that has already engaged Kuwaiti forces on contested territory once before, and that is now visibly bracing against a threat to its own survival on a completely different front, is not a regime whose next move can be predicted with confidence by anyone. That uncertainty is exactly why this story deserves your full attention right now. Not fear, not panic, but genuine, clear-eyed attention. Because somewhere between the loudest headline and the most dismissive analysis sits the actual truth, and the only way to find it is to keep watching closely, keep questioning every claim, and keep separating what's confirmed from what's simply being said out loud for effect. If you made it this far, you already understand this conflict better than most people scrolling past a scary headline today. So do one more thing before you go. Comment below with which border you think breaks first, Kuwait or Iran's own western frontier, and why. Then like this video so more people get an honest breakdown instead of pure panic. And subscribe so you're here the moment any of this turns from words into something confirmed. Because in a war this unpredictable, the next major shift could come without warning, from a direction almost nobody is watching closely enough right now.